The chamber was cold and silent. Gray walls stretched up toward a high ceiling that disappeared into shadows. 5 high-ranking officials sat behind a curved metal desk, their blue faces serious and still. The room smelled of fear and old secrets. Kethvar sat alone in the center of the room. His hands were folded in his lap, but they shook slightly. Once, his blue shell had been bright and smooth like polished metal. Now it was dull and covered with scars. Some scars came from weapons, others came from 15 years of sleepless nights. "Begin when you are ready," said the lead official. Her voice echoed in the empty space. Kethvar looked up at her. His yellow eyes were tired. So very tired. "I was Combat Specialist Kethvar, Service Number 4471 Delta 9, 47th Assault Legion." His voice was quiet, but steady. "For 15 years, I have kept silent about what happened during the human war. Today, that silence ends." The officials shifted in their chairs. One of them touched a recording device. The red light blinked on. "Why now?" asked another official. "The war ended long ago. Why speak of it today?" Kethvar closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids, he saw fire. He saw human faces. He heard screaming that never stopped, not even in his dreams. "Because the nightmares won't stop," he said. "Because other young soldiers are asking questions about the missing records. Because lies have weight, and I am too old to carry them anymore." He opened his eyes and looked directly at the lead official. "And because the humans are expanding again. Other species will make the same mistakes we did. They will think humans are weak. They will be wrong. And it is all. And it is all." The room was quiet for a long moment. Then the lead official nodded. "Tell us about the beginning. Tell us about first contact." Kethvar leaned back in his chair. His mind went back 15 years, to a time when the Zephyrian Empire ruled the galaxy without question. Back then, they were the strongest military force anyone had ever seen. Their ships were faster than light itself. Their weapons could destroy planets. Their armies had never lost a war. "We were perfect soldiers," he began. "We followed orders without question. We used the best technology in the galaxy. When we found a new species, we would study them first. Then we would contact their leaders. We would explain that they could join the Empire peacefully, or we would make them join by force. Most species chose peace." He paused, remembering. "We had rules for war, clean rules. We would destroy military targets only. We would not harm civilians. We would accept surrender immediately. Wars lasted days, sometimes weeks, never longer. The Empire had been expanding for 1,000 years this way." One of the officials leaned forward. "And then you encountered the humans." "Yes." The word came out like a sigh. "The humans." Kethvar stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the capital city of Zephyr Prime stretched to the horizon. Tall metal towers reached toward the purple sky. Everything was ordered and clean and peaceful. The intelligence reports said they were primitive. They had only discovered faster than light travel 50 years before. Their weapons were simple. Their ships were slow. They had no unified government, just hundreds of small nations that fought each other constantly. He turned back to face the tribunal. High Command called them recently evolved barbarians. The tactical computers predicted total victory in 72 hours. Some officers were angry because the assignment was too easy. They wanted a real challenge. "What was your opinion?" asked the lead official. "I believed what I was told to believe," Kethvar said. "I was a good soldier. I trusted my superiors. I trusted our technology. I trusted our way of war." He sat back down, his movements slow and careful. The human colony world was called Haven's Rest. It was a farming planet on the edge of their territory. 3 million humans lived there. Our fleet had 50 ships. Our ground forces had 12,000 soldiers. The humans had maybe 300 fighters and some old orbital stations. Kethvar's hands clenched into fists. "We sent the standard surrender message. We told them to give up their weapons and submit to imperial rule. We promised they would not be harmed if they cooperated. We gave them 6 hours to decide. And their response? They said no. The officials looked at each other. In Zephyrian culture, this was almost impossible to understand. When faced with certain defeat, all intelligent species chose to survive. Not just know, Kethvar continued. Their leader, a human female, sent a message back to our fleet. She said, "We know we cannot win. We know you will probably kill us all. But we will not surrender our freedom. If you want this world, you will have to take it from our dead hands." He laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. High Command thought it was a bluff, a negotiation tactic. They ordered the attack to proceed as planned. Minimal force, surgical strikes. Accept surrender when it came. Kethvar stood again, but this time he paced back and forth like a caged animal. Do you know what I remember most about that first day? It was not the explosions or the weapons fire. It was the sound the humans made when they fought. He stopped pacing and looked at the officials. They sang? Battle songs, war cries. Sometimes they just shouted each other's names. They made noise because they wanted to, because it gave them strength, because they were not afraid. His voice became quieter. In all our 1,000 years of war, we had never fought anyone who sang while they died. We had never seen soldiers who smiled while they charged into certain death. We had never encountered a species that treated war like a celebration. The lead official made a note on her tablet. Continue with the timeline. What happened in the first assault? Kethvar closed his eyes again. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Everything we knew about war was wrong. Everything we believed about survival was wrong. The humans taught us that, in the first hour, he looked up at the tribunal with eyes that had seen too much. You want to know what happened? I will tell you. But understand this. Once you hear this story, you will never sleep peacefully again. The humans were not monsters. That would have been easier to accept. The humans were something far worse than monsters. What were they? They were heroes. And there is nothing in this universe more terrifying than a species that fights not just to win, but because they believe fighting itself is noble. The recording light blinked steadily in the silence that followed. Kethvar walked back to his chair slowly. The tribunal waited for him to continue. He could see the doubt in their eyes. They still did not understand what was coming. The first attack was supposed to be simple, he said. Our ships would destroy their orbital defenses. Their fighters would retreat or surrender. Then we would land troops and secure key locations. Standard procedure. He sat down and stared at his hands. Their orbital stations were old and weak. Our weapons could cut through them like paper. But when we started shooting, something went wrong. The stations did not retreat. One of the officials leaned forward. Explain went wrong. They flew straight at us. Kethvar's voice was flat, emotionless. When their shields failed, when their weapons stopped working, when they were on fire and falling apart, they aimed their stations at our ships and flew directly into them. The tribunal looked confused. That makes no tactical sense, said the military advisor. Damaged ships should withdraw to fight another day. That is what we thought too, Kethvar said. But the humans were not following our rules. They were following their own rules. And their first rule was this: if you cannot win, make sure your enemy pays the highest price possible. He stood up again and began pacing. The station that hit our flagship was called Freedom's Gate. It was full of holes from our plasma cannons. Half of it was on fire. But it kept coming. The human commander sent one final message before impact. Kethvar stopped moving. He said, "For Earth and for freedom." Then he laughed. He laughed as his station exploded against our hull. The lead official made another note. Continue with the ground assault. We lost 2 ships in orbit, but we still had overwhelming superiority. 12,000 troops landed at 6 different locations around their main city. The humans had maybe 800 soldiers and some police officers. We expected them to surrender within hours. Kethvar sat back down. I was part of Alpha Team. We landed outside the city and advanced toward the government buildings. Our sensors showed human defenders ahead, but not many. My squad leader was confident. He said we would be done by sunset. He paused, lost in memory. The first human we saw was a medic. She was a small female, maybe half my size. She was treating wounded soldiers in a building that was falling down around her. We could see her through the broken walls. Did she surrender when she saw you? No. She looked at us, then went back to working on her patients. My squad leader told her to come out with her hands up. She ignored him completely. Kethvar's voice became quieter, so he shot a warning blast near her. The plasma bolt melted part of the wall. Any intelligent being would have run or surrendered. She just moved her patients to a safer corner and kept working. What did you do? Squad leader Vextar ordered us to storm the building. We thought she was crazy or in shock. We were wrong. She was just being human. Kethvar closed his eyes. When we entered the building, she finally looked up. She said something in their language. I did not understand the words, but I understood her meaning. She was asking us not to hurt her patients. Were the patients soldiers? Some were. Some were civilians. Some were children. Kethvar opened his eyes. It did not matter to her. Wounded was wounded. She would have treated injured Zephyrians the same way. The military advisor frowned. That violates basic survival instinct. Yes, Kethvar agreed. That was our first lesson about humans. Their survival instinct works differently than ours. They do not just try to survive themselves, they try to keep others alive too, even when it puts them in danger. He stood up and walked to the window again. We took the medic prisoner and secured the building. But the sound of weapons fire was getting louder outside. More humans were coming. How many? At first, maybe 50 soldiers. But then civilian vehicles started arriving. Farmers with hunting rifles. Construction workers with tools. Old humans who could barely walk, carrying whatever weapons they could find. Kethvar turned back to face the tribunal. My squad leader called for reinforcements. He could not understand what was happening. In his experience, civilians ran away from battles. They did not join them, but these civilians fought? They did more than fight. They coordinated. The farmers knew every path through the countryside. The construction workers knew every building in the city. The old humans taught the young ones how to make explosives from farming chemicals. Kethvar began pacing again, and they kept talking to each other. Not just military communications. They told jokes. They shared food. They asked about each other's families. In the middle of a war zone, they acted like they were at some kind of gathering. One of the officials looked skeptical. You make it sound almost pleasant. For them, it was. Kethvar stopped pacing. They were not just fighting an enemy. They were protecting their home, their friends, their way of life. For humans, that is not a burden. It is an honor. The lead official checked her notes. What were your casualties in the first day? Kethvar was quiet for a long moment. We lost 300 soldiers. The humans lost maybe 50. The tribunal exchanged glances. Those numbers were impossible. How? They knew the ground better than we did. They knew which buildings were strong and which would collapse. They knew where the sewers led and which roads were trapped. Most importantly, they knew each other. Kethvar sat down heavily. When one human fell, 2 others would take his place. When we destroyed their communication equipment, they passed messages by shouting. When they ran out of proper weapons, they used farming tools and kitchen knives. Kitchen knives? The military advisor sounded shocked. A human female, maybe 60 years old, killed 2 of our soldiers with a kitchen knife. She hid in a destroyed building and waited for us to walk by. Then she attacked. Kethvar's voice became very quiet. When we finally stopped her, she was smiling. She said she was proud to die defending her grandchildren. 5. The room was silent for several moments. By the end of the first day, Kethvar continued, we controlled maybe 6 buildings in a city of thousands. High Command sent more troops, then more. Each time, they said this next assault would finish the job. And did it? No, the humans adapted faster than we did. When we used energy weapons, they started wearing reflective materials. When we used explosives, they moved underground. When we tried to surround them, they appeared behind us. Kethvar looked directly at the lead official. But the worst part was not their tactics. The worst part was their attitude. Explain. They were happy. The words came out like a confession. Not all the time, of course. They grieved for their dead. They feared for their families. But when they fought, when they worked together, when they saved each other's lives, they were happy. He stood up one more time. We were professional soldiers doing a job. They were people protecting everything they loved. And for the first time in our military history, professionalism was not enough. Kethvar walked to the door, then turned back. That was just the first day on one small farming planet. We still thought it was an accident, a strange exception. We were wrong about that too. The recording light continued to blink in the growing silence. The lead official looked at her notes before speaking again. Tell us about the expansion of the conflict. How did High Command respond to the initial setbacks? Kethvar returned to his chair but did not sit down. He gripped the back of it with both hands. High Command decided that Haven's Rest was an unusual case. They said the humans there must have been specially trained or given advanced weapons by some unknown ally. So they planned larger operations against other human worlds. More ships? More troops? Both. And new tactics designed specifically for humans. Kethvar's laugh was bitter. The Strategic Planning Council studied everything from Haven's Rest. They thought they understood the human problem. He finally sat down. The first change was firepower. Instead of surgical strikes, we would use overwhelming force, destroy entire military bases in minutes. The humans would see the futility of resistance and surrender quickly. That seems logical. It was logical. It was also completely wrong. Kethvar rubbed his temples. When we destroyed human military bases with massive bombardments, the humans did not surrender. They got angry. The military advisor leaned forward. Angry? Yes. We learned later that humans have a concept called escalation. When you hit them harder, they hit back harder. When you destroy something they value, they become more determined to destroy you. Kethvar stood up and began his familiar pacing. The second target was a mining colony called New Brisbane. 50,000 humans. We brought 40 ships and 20,000 troops. The bombardment lasted 6 hours. We reduced their main city to rubble. And then they surrendered? No. They disappeared. The officials looked at each other in confusion. Disappeared. Into the mines. Into the wilderness. Into caves and tunnels we did not know existed. When our troops landed, they found empty buildings and silent streets. We thought we had won. Kethvar stopped pacing. We were wrong. The humans had not given up. They had changed tactics. He walked to the window and stared out at the peaceful city. They started small. A patrol would disappear. A supply convoy would be attacked. A communication relay would explode. Each incident seemed random and minor. Guerrilla warfare, said the military advisor. We did not know that term then. In Zephyrian military doctrine, defeated enemies either surrendered or died. They did not continue fighting from hiding places. We had no training for this. Kethvar turned back to face the tribunal. But it got worse. Much worse. Because the humans were not just hiding in caves. They were learning. Learning what? Everything. How our weapons worked. How our ships flew. How our soldiers thought. They captured equipment and figured out how to use it against us. They captured prisoners and treated them well, asking polite questions about Zephyrian technology. The lead official made a note. Enhanced interrogation? No. They gave our soldiers food and medical care, and asked if they wanted to talk. Many of our troops were so confused by the kindness that they answered freely. Kethvar sat down again. Within 3 months, the humans were using modified Zephyrian weapons. Within 6 months, they had learned to fly our captured ships. Within a year, they were building improved versions of our technology. Impossible. I thought so too. But humans learn very fast when they are motivated. And being invaded motivated them greatly. He was quiet for a moment, remembering. The third change High Command made was psychological warfare. If the humans would not respond to superior force, we would attack their will to fight. How? We threatened their families, their children. We told them that continued resistance would result in bombardment of civilian populations. Kethvar's hands clenched into fists. This was our worst mistake. The absolute worst possible thing we could have done. Why? Because humans do not fight less when their families are threatened. They fight more, much more. He stood up abruptly. I was part of the operation on New Geneva, a peaceful planet with universities and art museums. We thought if we threatened the civilians there, the human military would negotiate. Kethvar walked to the far wall and pressed his hands against it. Instead, every human on the planet became a soldier. Professors built bombs. Artists created camouflage. Children as young as 10 years old carried messages between resistance cells. Children? The humans have a saying, it takes a village to raise a child. We learned that it also takes a village to fight a war. Every human, from the youngest to the oldest, contributed something to the defense. He turned around, and they sang. Always. They sang. Work songs while they built defenses. Lullabies while they hid their children. Battle hymns while they attacked our positions. The military advisor frowned. Music is not a military asset. For humans it is. It connects them to each other. It reminds them what they are fighting for. It gives them courage when they are afraid. Kethvar walked back toward his chair, but did not sit. I remember one night on New Geneva. My unit was pinned down in a bombed building. We could hear human voices in the darkness around us. They were not giving orders or planning attacks. They were singing a song about their home world. His voice became very quiet. It was beautiful. Even though they were our enemies, even though they were trying to kill us, their song was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. What happened? When the song ended, they attacked. They fought with a ferocity that terrified us. But they also showed mercy to wounded Zephyrians. They gave water to prisoners. They treated captured soldiers like guests instead of enemies. Kethvar finally sat down. This was when I began to understand the real problem. We were not fighting a military. We were not even fighting a government. We were fighting a culture. The lead official looked up from her notes. Elaborate. Zephyrian soldiers fight because they are ordered to fight. Human soldiers fight because they choose to fight. Zephyrian soldiers follow commanders. Human soldiers follow ideas. He leaned forward. Their ideas were stronger than our weapons. Their culture was more powerful than our technology. Every time we thought we had defeated them, they proved us wrong. What was the final result on New Geneva? We held the capital city for 8 months. It cost us 40,000 troops. The humans lost maybe 10,000. Kethvar's voice was flat. We declared victory and withdrew. The humans declared victory and rebuilt. The room was quiet for a long moment. That was when High Command decided on the final option, Kethvar said, which was total war. Complete conquest of the human homeworld. Earth itself. He looked directly at each official in turn. They assigned 500,000 troops to the operation. The largest military force in Zephyrian history. They called it Operation Final Peace. Kethvar stood up one last time. But by then, I had learned something that High Command refused to accept. The humans were not just fighting for territory or resources or political control. They were fighting for the right to exist as free beings, and no army in the universe is strong enough to defeat that kind of motivation. The recording light blinked steadily as silence filled the chamber once again. Kethvar walked to the far end of the chamber and stood with his back to the tribunal. When he spoke, his voice was so quiet they had to strain to hear him. Earth was dying when we arrived. He turned around slowly. The human fleet was broken. Most of their colonies were under our control. Their supply lines were cut. Military analysts said they had maybe 3 months of fighting ability left. So victory was certain? That is what we believed. 500,000 Zephyrian troops. The finest warriors in the galaxy. Against a dying planet with a broken military. Kethvar walked back toward his chair but remained standing. I was assigned to the 12th Assault Division, tasked with capturing the human capital, the place called Washington, D.C. Intelligence said it would fall in 48 hours. He sat down heavily. We were so confident that some officers made bets about how quickly it would end. The shortest guess was 6 hours. The lead official checked her notes. What was the actual timeline? 6 months. The words came out like a confession. 6 months of the bloodiest fighting in Zephyrian military history. Kethvar closed his eyes. The first surprise was the orbital defenses. According to our intelligence, Earth had no functioning defense satellites. We were wrong. As our ships approached the planet, thousands of small objects began moving toward us. Defense satellites? Better. Civilian spacecraft. Cargo haulers. Passenger ships. Private yachts. Even space construction vehicles. All converted into weapons. He opened his eyes and looked at the tribunal. They could not hurt our warships. Their weapons were too small, their armor too weak. But there were so many of them. And they would not retreat. Ramming attacks again? Some, yes. But mostly they just got in our way. They blocked our sensors. They disrupted our formations. They forced us to waste time and ammunition on targets that should not have mattered. Kethvar stood up and began pacing. But the strangest part was the radio chatter. The civilian pilots were talking to each other constantly. Not military communications. Personal messages. Such as, "Tell my wife I love her. Give my children a kiss for me. See you on the other side. Brother." They knew they were going to die. But they sounded peaceful about it. The military advisor leaned forward. Fear can manifest in unusual ways. No. Kethvar stopped pacing. Not fear. Acceptance. They had already made their choice. They were not hoping to survive. They were hoping their sacrifice would matter. He sat down again. When we finally reached the planet's surface, the real nightmare began. Kethvar was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. Every city was a fortress. Every building was a weapon. Every human civilian was a potential soldier. Surely the civilians evacuated? Some did. But millions stayed. They said it was their home and they would not abandon it. Children helped carry ammunition. Elderly humans served as lookouts and message runners. Scientists continued working in laboratories even as the buildings collapsed around them. The lead official made a note. What about the actual military forces? By the time we landed, there was no difference between military and civilian. Everyone fought. Everyone contributed. A grandmother with a kitchen knife was just as dangerous as a trained soldier with a plasma rifle. Kethvar stood up and walked to the window. We entered New York City with 30,000 troops. The humans had maybe 5,000 military personnel defending it. We should have taken it in days. How long did it actually take? 3 months. And we never really controlled it. He turned back to face the tribunal. The humans had prepared every street, every building, every subway tunnel. When we advanced, they retreated deeper into the city. When we thought we had cleared an area, they reappeared behind us. Standard urban warfare tactics. No. Much worse than standard. They knew that city, like it was their own body. Because it was their home. Kethvar began pacing again, faster this time. I remember the Battle of Manhattan Crater. It was a park that had been bombed into a giant hole in the ground. Intelligence said it was empty. We sent 1,000 troops to secure it. And it was not empty. The humans had built an entire base underground. Tunnels, workshops, living quarters, medical facilities. They had been preparing for this siege for months. His voice became strained. It took us 72 hours to clear that crater. 72 hours for 6 city blocks. We lost 800 troops. The humans lost maybe 50. How is that possible? Because they were not just defending territory. They were defending their idea of home. Every room, every hallway, every tunnel was sacred to them. Kethvar stopped pacing and gripped the back of his chair. But the moment I understood we could never win was in the subway tunnels under the city. What happened there? My squad got separated from the main force. We were lost in the tunnels, being hunted by human soldiers they called tunnel rats. Fast, quiet fighters who knew every passage. He sat down slowly. We found a medical station the humans had set up in an abandoned train car. There were wounded humans there, but also wounded Zephyrians. Our enemies were treating our soldiers with the same care they gave their own people. The tribunal exchanged glances. When the human medic saw us, she did not run or call for help. She asked if any of us were injured. Kethvar's voice became very quiet. One of my soldiers had been hurt in an explosion earlier. His arm was bleeding badly. The human medic treated his wounds while her own people were shooting at us just tunnels away. Why would she do that? Because she was a medic. In human culture, medical personnel help anyone who needs help. Enemy, friend, civilian, soldier. It does not matter. He looked up at the officials. That was when I realized the truth. We were not fighting soldiers. We were not fighting a government or a military force. We were fighting a way of thinking. Explain. Humans believe that some things are more important than survival. Freedom, dignity, the right to protect others, the right to die for something meaningful. Kethvar stood up one more time. You cannot defeat that with weapons. You cannot negotiate with that. You cannot scare that into surrender. Because it is not about winning or losing. It is about being true to what you believe. The lead official checked her notes. What was the final outcome of the Earth campaign? After 6 months, we controlled maybe a dozen cities out of hundreds. Our casualties were over 200,000. Human casualties were perhaps 30,000. He walked to the door and put his hand on the control panel. High Command declared victory and ordered immediate withdrawal. They said the humans had learned their lesson and would not trouble the Empire again. But that was not true? No. As our ships left Earth's orbit, human radio stations began broadcasting across the galaxy. Not threats or demands. Stories. Kethvar's hand trembled on the door control. Stories about farmers who became soldiers. About grandmothers who built bombs. About children who carried messages through war zones. About medics who treated enemies like friends. He turned back to face the tribunal one last time. Other species heard those stories. And they began to ask questions about freedom. About courage. About what it means to fight for something you believe in. The recording light blinked steadily in the heavy silence. The humans did not defeat us with weapons. They defeated us with ideas. And ideas, once released, cannot be contained. Kethvar remained standing by the door, his hand still on the control panel. The tribunal waited in silence for him to continue. When we returned to Zephyr Prime, everything had changed, he said without turning around. Not the buildings or the technology. Those were the same. But the people were different. How so? The soldiers who came back from Earth were not the same soldiers who had left. We had seen something that our military doctrine said was impossible. We had seen a species that fought harder when losing than when winning. He finally turned around and walked back to the center of the room. High Command tried to maintain the official story. They said the human campaign was a complete success. They said all resistance had been crushed and the threat eliminated. But the soldiers knew better? Yes, and we talked to each other. In private, quietly, but we talked. We shared our stories. We tried to understand what we had experienced. Kethvar sat down in his chair for the last time. That was the beginning of the silence. Official orders came down that the human campaign was classified. No records, no reports, no discussion of any kind. Anyone who talked about it would face court-martial. The lead official leaned forward. Why such extreme secrecy? Because the human war broke something fundamental in our society. For 1,000 years, the Zephyrian Empire had been built on one simple idea. We were superior. Better technology, better tactics, better soldiers. He paused, choosing his words carefully. The humans proved that was not enough. They proved that technology without purpose is useless. That tactics without belief are weak. That soldiers without cause cannot win. What was the psychological impact on returning troops? Devastating. Kethvar's voice became flat and clinical. 60% were declared unfit for military service, not because of physical injuries, but because they could no longer function as soldiers. He rubbed his temples. We had nightmares. Not about death or violence. Those we could handle. We had nightmares about human faces, about their songs, about the way they smiled when they were dying for something they believed in. Including you? Especially me. Every night for 15 years, I see the same images. The medic in the destroyed building. The grandmother with the kitchen knife. The pilots who died singing about their home world. Kethvar stood up and walked to the window one more time. But the worst part was the questions. Young soldiers would ask about the missing years in our military history. They would wonder why there were no records of campaigns between years 2387 and 2392. How did you respond? We lied. We said it was routine operations. Nothing worth remembering. But the lies felt heavier each year. He turned back to face the tribunal. Some of us tried to contact each other. Quietly, carefully. We formed small groups to share our experiences and try to heal. But it was never enough. The military advisor frowned. You mentioned young soldiers asking questions. Why is that significant now? Because the humans are expanding again. Our intelligence networks report new colonies, new ships, new technologies, and they are making contact with other species. Kethvar walked closer to the tribunal desk. 3 months ago, the Altarian Republic contacted us. They said human diplomats had visited their home world. Not to threaten or demand tribute. To offer assistance. What kind of assistance? Medical technology, agricultural techniques, educational exchange programs. The humans were sharing their knowledge freely, asking for nothing in return except friendship. The lead official made a note. That seems unusual. For us, yes. But humans do not think like we do. They see other species as potential friends, not potential subjects. Kethvar placed both hands on the desk and leaned forward. The Altarians were confused by this generosity. So they asked their human contacts about the Zephyrian Empire, about our history, about our military capabilities. And what did the humans say? They told the truth. They said we had fought a war 15 years ago. They said it was a terrible waste of life on both sides. They said they hoped we could be friends now instead of enemies. The room was completely silent. No threats. No boasting about their victory. No demands for reparations. They spoke of us like the war was a tragic misunderstanding between neighbors. Kethvar straightened up. That was when I decided to break my silence. Because other species are going to encounter humans. And they will make the same mistakes we did. Which mistakes specifically? They will assume that humans fight like other species, for territory, for resources, for dominance. They will not understand that humans fight for ideas, for each other, for the right to be free. He walked back to his original position in the center of the room. If we do not warn them, they will attack first and ask questions later. Just like we did. And you believe they will lose? I believe they will learn what we learned. That military superiority means nothing against a species that values freedom more than life. 1. I believe they will learn what we learned. 1. They will learn what we learned. Kethvar looked directly at each official in turn, but I also learned something else from my 15 years of nightmares. Something that might prevent future wars. What is that? The humans do not want to fight us. They never did. They only fought because we forced them to choose between freedom and slavery. He sat down one last time. I have been in secret communication with some of the humans who fought against us. Veterans, like myself. They have the same nightmares I do. They remember the same faces. They wonder if there was another way. The tribunal exchanged glances. You have been in contact with former enemies? Yes. And I learned that they are not our enemies anymore. They never wanted to be enemies at all. Kethvar's voice became stronger, more confident. The human veterans I have spoken with say their people are ready for peace. Real peace. Not the peace of conquest, but the peace of understanding. What do you recommend? Contact them officially. Acknowledge the war. acknowledge our mistakes, ask for forgiveness, and offer friendship. He stood up. The humans have already proven they can defeat us militarily. Now let them prove they can forgive us as well. I. The lead official closed her notebook. Is that the end of your testimony? No. One more thing. Kethvar walked to the center of the room and stood at attention. I want to formally request permission to return to Earth as an ambassador, not to spy or to threaten, but to learn. To understand how a species can be so strong and so merciful at the same time. You want to live among former enemies? I want to live among people who have figured out how to turn enemies into friends, because that is something the galaxy needs to learn. He relaxed his stance. The humans have a saying: the best way to defeat an enemy is to make him your friend. After 15 years of nightmares, I am ready to discover what that means. The recording light finally stopped blinking. This tribunal is adjourned, said the lead official. We will consider your testimony and your request. As the officials filed out, Kethvar remained standing in the center of the empty chamber. For the first time in 15 years, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter. Outside the window, the sun was setting over Zephyr Prime. But somewhere among the stars, on a blue planet called Earth, humans were waking up to a new day. And perhaps, if he was very fortunate, Kethvar would someday wake up there too. The silence in the chamber was different now. Not the heavy silence of buried secrets, but the quiet peace of truth finally told. It was a beginning.